Albert Camus was born in Algiers in 1913, but Algeria at the time was part of France. It was 3 departments of France, which meant that the education in the lycées and the universities was all run from the Ministry of Education in Paris. So he had a very similar philosophical education to Sartre and de Beauvoir, 6 years of it, with professors sent over from Paris who made a deep impression on him. Someone who was born in Algiers 15 years later than him was Jacques Derrida. And Jacques Derrida had a rather similar education in Algiers. And then at the last stage, he was able to get to Paris and go to the École Normale and become a proper French certificated philosopher. Camus reached that stage and he failed his medical. So he was not allowed to go on the track to be trained as a philosophy professor in his own right. So he had to he stayed in Algiers as a journalist. One of the things he did when he first started planning to be a writer, when he was in his 20s, so this was Algiers in the 1930s, he said he planned to have a writing life consisting of 3 great triptychs. Each triptych was to consist of a work of fiction, a theatrical piece, a drama, and a commentary. And the first of these phases was going to be, the theme was going to be negativity, the absurd, the clash between rationality and absurdity. And that's when he wrote a famous book, The Outsider, and a play called Caligula and the Myth of Sisyphus. And then he moved on to the next stage, where this theme was to be not Sisyphus, but Prometheus. It was to be positive. It was about the battle with philosophical nihilism. And that's so the book The Plague, and the play State of Siege, and then L'Homme révolté, the rebel. And then the third stage was going to be, so after Sisyphus and Prometheus, you were going to have Nemesis, which he didn't mean quite in the way we think of it as being vengeance, but just justice. And justice and love. I mean, he connected the 2 themes. But the only step he made to producing the Nemesis volume was La Chute, a meditation on justice. He died in a car crash in 1960 at the age of 46. So, half of what he might have written never got written.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that when he died, he what was found in the car was the unfinished manuscript of a novel that might indeed have been. I mean, he thought it would be his great work. It was going to be a multi-volume book about his childhood in Algeria, and certainly what we have is extraordinary. I think it's of a slightly different order to any of his other fiction, but it's unfinished, so you can't really say much about it. But yes, so it's a short life. And as you were saying earlier, compared to Sartre and de Beauvoir, although it's certainly productive, it's not insanely productive in the same way that they were.
He was a careful and scrupulous writer in a way that they weren't. He was also a journalist. I mean, half of his output was actually journalism. But there's been a habit, especially in the English-speaking world, of bracketing Camus with Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. And I don't think that does any favors to any of them, really. And one thing in particular is that Camus was a self-consciously very elegant writer, almost an aesthete about his prose. He was he was a perfectionist about his prose, whereas, on the other hand, Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir made a point of saying that prose was not an artistic form at all, that the ideal of that prose is like a window. You should just keep it clean and say what you have to say and then stop. Camus' first novel, for which is inordinately famous, L'Étranger, and usually translated as The Outsider, which came out in 1942 and which was sort of launched on the world by a very positive review from Sartre. I don't think they knew each other at the time, but and like Sartre and de Beauvoir, Camus was very interested in the American novel, in Faulkner and Hemingway, and this, in a way, L'Étranger is a tribute to Hemingway. He talks about being the tough American writers who he wanted to imitate in this book. That makes it quite easy to read. Short sentences, very spare vocabulary, none of the elaborate subjunctives that he has in La Chute. And for many years, it may still be so, it was by far the favourite text for students learning French as a foreign language. So it became an incredible bestseller, but to people who were reading it as a task rather than for enlightenment or excitement. And I think there was a lot of misreading. On the face of it, the book is rather like Sartre's Un Nausée. It's a short first-person narrative by a lonely young man, completely up himself, who finds ordinary morality rather ridiculous. And in fact, Camus' hero is even more of a shit than Sartre's hero, because do you remember he has a neighbour who wants to ensnare an Arab girl, invite her over, so that he can rape her and beat her up. And the hero of Camus' book offers to write a letter to get the girl over, and the trick works. And after that, he's on the beach and he sees an Arab man who is, I think, brother or cousin to the girl who's been raped. And in the end, he ends up shooting him. So somehow, readers in the English-speaking world think that Camus' hero is supposed to be a role model, just as they tend to think that Sartre's hero was supposed to be a role model. And I think that's completely wrong. In both cases, they're presented to us as people who have certain insights, but as completely self-deluded as well. And I think that I would trace this illusion, this distraction of a bad way of reading both these books to, do you remember Colin Wilson?
Oh, God, yes.
The Outsider, which was,
yes.
Whose title is a tribute to the translation of Camus' super successful book. It came out in 1956 with rave reviews from, or at least on the back cover, Edith Sitwell, Cyril Connolly saying, this is the great new force. And Wilson, he focuses on, he covers a lot of ground, including Blake and English Romanticism, and he's looking for heroes, isolated young men who go against the grain of society and of conventional morality. And he thought we should read these two books as hero books about how we ought to behave. And he comments, actually, that in our time, Romanticism has been revived under another name, existentialism. And the point about an existentialist hero, says Wilson, is that they're heroes because they know that the only choice in life is between being useless without knowing it and being useless and knowing it. And so they can congratulate themselves because while they're as useless as everyone else, at least they know it. So it's a kind of, a terrible kind of vulgar, elitist campaign that Wilson tried to recruit Camus and Sartre to. And I'm afraid that quite a lot of readers, even now, still swallow that bait. They don't realize how extremely complex both of these authors are, and also how actually very, very little they have to do with each other. Camus said Sartre didn't like the word existentialism, and I think Camus really wanted nothing to do with it at all, because he really was very, very different. I don't know. I've mentioned how he was educated in Algeria, and that was very important to him. He had a full 6 or 7 years of strict French philosophical education. He ended up by writing a dissertation on Saint Augustine and Plotinus. So it was called Christian Metaphysics and Neoplatonism. And his point was that Christians like Saint Augustine could never really understand the Greek pagan world, and that they were the poorer for it. But he also thought that Plotinus and Augustine had a great advantage over most of the rest of the philosophical tradition, that they were not northerners. They were both Africans, as like Camus, Plotinus from Egypt and Augustine from Algeria. And so they had, from their daily life, from their experience on the beach, they had a knowledge of something that existentialists didn't know, which is that the sun shines and that it's wonderful to be out in it. You don't have to have a project, as Sartre and Beauvoir were always saying. You don't have to have a purpose. There's such a thing as pleasure for its own sake. I mean, Augustine might want to distance himself from it, but he knew what he was talking about. And he even constructed, I don't know quite how serious he was about it, this idea of a Mediterranean school of philosophy, which was a philosophy of sunshine. That's what I think. If Camus would have wanted to have a single a kind of symbol of his attitude to philosophy, it was the sunshine, and he thought, and he one of the reasons he loved Nietzsche was Nietzsche's idea that Western civilization went wrong when it departed from pre-Platonic, pre-Aristotelian, pre-Socratic pagan philosophy and lost the understanding of finitude and the body, and he summed up this his idea of Mediterranean existence. He says this world of sunshine, but also destitution, where I have lived so long. The poverty prevented me from thinking that all is well under the sun, but the sunshine taught me that history is not everything. Well, of course, I mean, for Sartre, history is everything. So I think that's a very clear parting of the ways.